there is a famous struggle that emerges out of mythological tradition after Achilles is killed, tragically. He has these heroic arms, they're divine. Whoever has them is going to have an impenetrable, except for that poor heel, an impenetrable shield around them. So of course these are hot property, and the Greek heroes think, each of them thinks that they should have the arms of Achilles. Well, the two that emerge as the best candidates to get the arms of Achilles are Ajax and Odysseus, known as Ulysses in our treatment here. So we have Ajax versus Ulysses. And famously in the tradition, the two of them have a verbal battle. They have a verbal struggle over who should have the arms. Each of them gives a speech that says why they should be the one that gets the arms of Achilles. Rather than focus on any of their own good qualities, they mention their own good qualities, but they mostly just in the tradition criticize the other person. So Ajax will say nasty things about Ulysses, and Ulysses will say nasty things about Ajax. In the version that Ovid gives us, Ajax's opening statement talks about Ulysses doing the night raid, a famously nasty bit of work that Ulysses did in the Iliad, Book 11. We talk about how Ulysses faked madness in order to dodge the draft. That's true. He tried to avoid going to Troy by faking the madness. We hear about Philoctetes, who is a warrior who was wounded on the way to Troy, and has this awful condition that is so nasty it makes all the other Greek warriors just disgusted. So they have to kind of nastily get rid of Philoctetes, and they just stow him off on an island and let him kind of rot on his own. Well, Ulysses is the one that spearheads that little nasty business as well. He's a crafty talker and a liar, Ajax says, and he is parasitical on Diomedes, this other great warrior who Ajax says does all the hard fighting. Then Odysseus jumps in and says, well, he instantly diffuses this issue of himself as a crafty talker. He says, please don't hold it against me that I can speak well, as long as, and I hope that you don't hold it against Ajax that he's really stupid. Jumps into some nastiness right off the bat. We have a flattering opening, and he's especially careful to flatter Agamemnon throughout the speech. So as a good rhetorician, he makes sure his audience likes him. And then he recounts all his own victories and successes and talks about how stupid Ajax is. That's Odysseus' whole speech. And Ovid spends a lot of time in his treatment of the Trojan War dealing with these two, arguing back and forth, talking about each other. Well, the nastiness here is this kind of, there's in the end here a kind of victory of chattering over heroism. These two are saying in a rhetorical debate, that's not as glorious as a debate using martial weapons of arms. They're on the same side, so it has a kind of aspect of civil war to it. Where has the glory gone? As we saw in our earlier lecture, Ovid is kind of taking the typical glorious moments out of this story and instead focusing on inglorious ones. And in the case here of a famous one of Ajax and Ulysses taking the stuffing out of each other, saying nasty things about one another, running each other down in order to try to get the arms of Achilles for themselves. This story is not always quite so negative in valence. Ovid has really quite made it like that, so the two really run each other down. It's also, I think, probably significant for us to point out one quick footnote on the education system in Ovid's time. Remember, we talked about him as having great training to be a good spokesman and wonderfully skilled in the verbal arts. This is a way to get ahead in his time. It's equivalent to what contemporary lawyers' training would be. So Ovid has gotten this great training. Well, one of the standard ways that people practiced in their education system in ancient Rome, practice and sharpen their verbal arts, was to take set pieces from ancient mythology and then produce them up on stage for their peers. And the set pieces they'd take would be where one character from mythology would argue against another, and those arguments would be kind of nasty verbal back and forths against each other. So Ovid surely must have seen many times, and probably himself participated in, lots of arguments of Ajax and Achilles, or arguments of Ajax and Ulysses over the arms of Achilles. He knew this as an exercise as a schoolboy, and here he's putting it in his epic in a way that I think is meant to reflect back, for the Romans to reflect back on themselves. He has presented mythic poetry as if it's a schoolboy's exercise. Well, guess what? That's exactly how his teachers used it in the training that he got as a lawyer. This grand mythological tradition with all its heroism has been reformulated and repackaged into a tight little discrete schoolboy's exercise to train you up in verbal arts to rip down your friend who's also your countryman, who happens to be your opponent in some political or legal battle. It's a wonderfully subtle satirical move on Ovid's part. It shows his careful satirical eye, his savage wit, and his brilliant skill at bringing those two things together.